Hey everybody, welcome back to our final sword video of this current cycle. We have completed all of our white belt curriculum, our form, one steps, escape skills, strikes, blocks, stances, all the stuff that you need to know in order for that first white belt is now been put out. So what I'm going to talk about today is training, practicing by yourself, and then just a couple of other things to remember when using a sword. When you are practicing by yourself, remember that the sword is a weapon, like we have said at the beginning of every video, treat it as such. When you're handling a sword, practice like you would if you were using a real sword. On a real sword, there's only one edge of the blade that's sharp, and that's the outside of it. On the inside, it's not sharp, it's a flattened edge. So still practice by not touching the blade. Touching the blade, the oils from your handle stain the blade, and it is unnecessary, not needed to be touched. The only times when you would touch a blade is when you're displaying the sword, handing it, receiving it. That would be the only time you touch the blade, and even then, you're not really touching the blade of the sword. So when you are practicing, treat the weapon as if it was real. When you do hold the sword by your side, a sword would normally have a sheath, so you don't grab the handle of it, you would hold it here. This would be the only time you would touch the blade of your practice sword, would be if you were holding it by your side. So when you are using the sword, remember 2 hands on the sword at all times. You want about a finger width between the top of your hand and the guard of the sword. If you keep it right up next to it, what that's going to do is after a little bit of use, you're going to start skinning the tops of your knuckles on the inside of your thumb here, and that's just not fun at all. As you practice, remember when striking with the sword, lead with the blade of the sword. You don't want to turn it sideways. You'll hear in some other sword arts, as you block, you turn the sword sideways. That way it doesn't hit with the blade of your sword. It doesn't really matter. A small nick in it, it's still got all this sharp edge of the sword. As you attack and defend, you want that blade away from you. That's also another reason why we don't turn it sideways as we block, because now the blade is not pointed directly away from me. The safest place is with the blade pointing away from me. As you attack, move with the arms. Don't just do the hand movements. There's no power, there's no support, and it doesn't get me the correct angles of attack on the sword that I want to do as well. So as you start practicing the form, remember it's a sword form, so the stances are going to be a little different. They're a little closer together. The knees aren't quite as bent. You want to keep your legs pretty much underneath you. If they stick out too far, such as a really wide sitting stance or a front stance here, then the knee is exposed, and there may be attacks or blocks that move close to your knee, and hitting your sword against your knee could hurt your sword. It could definitely hurt your knee. So we want to keep our feet generally underneath us and kind of out of harm's way. Remember the difference between striking and slashing. If you're unsure on what the move is, check. We have lists, we have other videos giving details of each move of strikes or slash. As you strike, you want to stop just past the target. So if my target is here in front of me, I want my strike to stop here rather than in front of it. A slash would follow all the way through. The slash is still not a wild swing. I don't want it following too far behind me. It stays in front of me, but it passes clear through the target. It's usually more of a powerful strike. The strike is a lot more control over it, and maybe not as strong of a technique. The slash has quite a bit more power to it. All right, so when you are carrying a sword, there's a couple of ways to do this so that you're carrying it in a way that you can use it quickly as well as not hit other people around you. One of the ways of doing that is the way that I'm holding it right now. This would be if you have a sheath and a sword, and you're not going to be using the sheath, meaning you're more or less transporting the sword from one area to the next, and you don't need this sheath of the sword. So what I would do is I would carry it just like this, holding the sword in front of me, both hands, my other hand grabbing my wrist. This allows me to quickly access my sword if needed, as well as a very non-aggressive, relaxed posture as well. When I do need to use the sword, I would draw the sword, and then I would set the sheath down off to the side and be able to practice my sword. The other way of carrying it is the standard by the side. This would be ready to use the sword. If I'm carrying it down here, it's not really that same level of aggressiveness, so unless I need to use the sword, it's probably going to be held down here. If you are carrying the sword in your belt here, you always want to keep a hand on it. It's always going to be kind of in this up position. If you let it go, the sword could move around, and we don't want that. There's no control over the back end of the sword, as well as it's not easily accessible. At this point, I can grab the sword if I need to. This would be tucked into my belt. If I was planning on using the sword and sheathing and unsheathing it quite a bit, I would draw the sword, I would do whatever I need to do with the sword, and then when I'm done, I would put the sword back in and it would stay here. This is planning on being sheathed and unsheathed multiple times throughout whatever I'm doing. Another way of carrying the sword, this would be in a more enclosed space. You're walking through a crowd of people. The sword is held here in front of you. Again, I'm not going to hold the handle of it. Hold it by the sheath, thumb over the guard to prevent it from accidentally sliding out. This one here, the sword is more or less in front of you, so you can keep track of it. This is great for carrying multiple swords if you ever need to do that as well. It could still be accessed as well. It just stays more or less close to you. When you are carrying a sword, be aware of where the back end of it is. You don't want to be turning and swinging the sword out and hitting people in the knees. That would be bad with it as well. So thanks for watching. As I said earlier in the video, this is going to be our final sword video. We've had the Sword and the Bow Staff curriculum has been put out there. If at all you get lost, go back, check the videos. That's what they're there for. If you want to start a new sword class, or have more of these seminars that we did previously, come talk to us, let us know, practice. It was a lot of fun to have the seminars, the summer camps. We did swords in there. A lot of you that were at summer camps know the curriculum, so if you get lost, these videos will be a great refresher course. Next week's video is going to be a fun weapon. It's going to be a little different. It's going to be a surprise, so I can't tell you just yet. So stay tuned for next week. Thank you and see you later.